This is AP Government, Week 3, the building blocks of government, an interactive lesson. Remember, for this lesson, have a few things handy. Among them, have your readings handy, your text from Chapter 1, the first half, your homework from the third week, the democracy homework will be really helpful for you, and your notes. So we'll start today by having you brainstorm some connections. I want you to take a look at this video and see if you can connect it with anything at all we've talked about so far in this class. It's about a minute long. And as you watch it, just write down whatever pops into your head.
Frankly, we're scared. We're scared of an Obama presidency. First of all, I want to be president of the United States, and obviously I do not want Senator Obama to be. But I have to tell you, he is a decent person and a person that you do not have to be scared as president of the United States. Now, look, if I didn't think I wouldn't be one heck of a lot better president, I wouldn't be running, okay? And that's the point. That's the point.
I got to ask you a question. I do not believe in. I can't trust Obama. I have read about him, and he's an Arab. He is not.
No, man. He's a decent family man, citizen that I just happen to have disagreements with on fundamental issues, and that's what this campaign is all about. He's not. Thank you. Yes.
So take a moment to reflect. You can pause the video too. You might have thought about a few different things. Our discussion and reading about demographics might make you think about who the audience is here. Your awareness of politics right now might make you feel like John McCain in 2008 is a pretty big contrast. You might even push back at some of the general praise that John McCain gets for his approach here, calling his opponent a decent family man. One reason why you might push back is because he doesn't question something that we probably should question, which is that this woman thought being an Arab was a bad thing. Maybe the reassurance shouldn't just be, no, he's not, but instead to push back against her assumption. There's a lot of different angles here, but there's some things I admire about John McCain that I pick up again when I watch this video from when he was alive and campaigning. We're going to look at demographics next. You read some about demographics. I want to make sure you have a pretty good feel for what we mean when we say it. We're talking about data that relates to the population and particular groups within it. It's from the Greek for writing about the people. And when we talk about demographics, we're usually looking at a few things. How do we want to divide up the population into groups, and what do we want to know about those groups? They could be, like in the picture, dividing by age. And that's where you started. And that's what this chapter that you just read talks about a little bit. It says, if you want to know what demographic characteristic we want to focus on, let's start with age. We've got people who are high school and college age. Let's contrast them with Americans over 65. Write down in your notes a couple of things that the book said were true when it relates to politics and government about groups of Americans between 18 and 24 or 25 and Americans over 65. What are some differences between those groups? We can push against that too. Anything you read in a textbook is by definition at least a little bit outdated. And there are some signs of change among the youngest generation that I think are notable. Feel free to share your thoughts there in your notes. I love to read those, and they make for really good conversation. So what do we want to know about those groups? We might just be asking how many people are in each group, and that's interesting data to look at. For a long time, the baby boomers were the largest generation in America. The generation born between 1946, when 3 of our presidents were born, Trump, Clinton, and George W. Bush, and 1964, the tail end of the baby boom. As they've aged, and some have begun to die, and their children and grandchildren are being born, there's a younger generation that's actually now larger than the baby boom. And we'll look at that some in this class. You might be asking something deeper, like how likely was each group to vote? Put down in your notes what you know about voter turnout as it relates to age. or what you think might be true if you're not sure. So if you didn't pause, you instantly got the answer, but that's okay. This graphic shows you age and voter turnout over a pretty long period of time from 1986 to 2018. And you might notice a few things. Write down in your note where you see peaks versus troughs. That is ups and downs. And speculate about why that might be. Also make what's probably a pretty obvious observation about the relationship between age and voter turnout. Voter turnout means the percentage of people who are eligible who actually vote. You'll notice a pretty clear trend by age, and one that stays consistent over the years. There are some changes, though. 2018 is a fascinating year to look at. No other midterm election year in recent history had young people voting at levels this high. Really had anyone voting at levels this high, but young people helped to close the gap. That is, they voted at even higher levels. That's worth looking at. We'll talk about why, but speculate now. Why would voter turnout be so high in 2018 when we weren't even electing a president? In some states, it was higher than the presidential election year of 2016. If only 18 to 24-year-olds had voted, here's what the map would have looked like in the 2016 presidential election. Clinton would have won far more states and gotten more electoral votes. A couple of states are not colored in blue or red because we didn't have enough data. Not enough young people answered polls in those particular two states to give a really clear feel. But we have enough of a feel from the rest of the country. So now we're not talking about voter turnout, but instead voter behavior. How people vote, who they vote for. Write in your notes a couple of theories about why younger people are more likely to vote for the Democratic candidate, in this case, Hillary Clinton. Also write down a couple of explanations that could be true for why younger people still vote less and older people vote more. I want to see your theories, and that'll help really push conversation in an interesting way. Remember as we go along, if there's things that are familiar to you, it's okay to speed up. Don't actually skip them over, because sometimes I'll mention things that I haven't mentioned anywhere else. But it's okay to speed me up in familiar parts and pause and write things down in parts that are new. Let's look at fragmentation. One observation political scientists have made is that people today and American culture today is more divided and split up, not just in a sort of negative, polarized, angry at each other way, but also just in a we're paying attention to different things kind of way. A lot of our cultural touchstones, the things we have in common, aren't really touchstones at all anymore. Back in the 50s, 2/3 of America was watching the same TV show. These days, maybe 3% of America turns into the top-rated shows. Our culture is more fragmented in a lot of ways, and that's one. See if you can think of other examples. And also, in your notes, feel free to push back against this. Talk about things you believe that Americans today have in common, and maybe particularly young Americans today have in common. Now we're going to look at some early influences. We went from looking at demographics today to democracy back in the day. I want to look at some of the formative influences on our country's philosophy about democracy. We'll start with the Greek city-states. Some of them were small enough and focused enough that they actually had direct democracy, where all eligible citizens would gather together to vote on issues. Athens is a prime example. One thing I want you to keep in mind, though, is that access was still pretty limited. That is, we're not talking about every person voting or even every adult voting. Not even every adult male voting. Every male over the age of 18 in Athens whose parents were also citizens of Athens could vote. But that narrows it down considerably. Greece was used as an example of direct democracy, and Rome and the Roman Republic is used as an example of indirect democracy. People were so spread out they couldn't all show up in one place and vote on laws. But what they could do was elect representatives to a legislature. And the Roman legislature was rather complicated. There were several different groups, including a Senate like we have now. Worth keeping in mind, though, is that this is not some noble example of democracy either. We're talking about a system like Greece's in which people were enslaved. A system in which true democracy direct or indirect, really wasn't something that existed. I don't want to paint America as far better in every way, but there are some clear ways in which we're more inclusive now, even if there are also some clear ways in which we could grow more inclusive still. There was an ancient Greek thinker named Isocrates, not to be confused with Socrates, and he was a critic of democracy. Just because we talk about what makes a good democracy doesn't mean that democracy is itself ideal. There may be a better and a worse form, but Isocrates actually said democracy's bad. Take a look at this quote. Pause and examine it, and write down some actual points of fact about America today or in the past that would help to support or oppose his idea that democracy is itself bad, that it teaches its citizens lawlessness, abrasive speech, anarchy. What is he opposing democracy with? What is his counterpoint? Worth considering. The last thinker we'll look at as an early influence on democracy is John Locke.